Bravo was released in 1959, was directed by Howard Hawks, written by Jules Furthman and Lee Brackett, and stars John Wayne, Dean Martin, Ricky Nelson, Angie Dickinson, and Walter Brennan. With Rio Bravo, I think I might have to start a review series called What More Can Be Said. This series would focus on movies that have already been talked about by everyone. Every performance has been critiqued and praised, each moment has been examined, and every theme and subtext has already been mined. So with that being said, I'm going to talk about why this movie is so special to me, and why I have watched it so many times throughout my life. I might not hit every piece of Hollywood history connected to it, but I think everything about Rio Bravo has been pretty well documented by others already. But if for some strange reason you haven't seen it before, the basic story is this. A small town sheriff arrests a killer and then must hold him in the town jail. The killer's brother, a powerful rancher, sends in an army of gunmen to find some way to break his brother out of jail. Up against these increasingly steep odds, the sheriff has a small band of loyal deputies to back him up. And that's it. The first thing I love about Rio Bravo is that it has the bare minimum of plot to hang the movie upon. The rest of the movie's running time is ostensibly a waiting game, or a siege, but at the same time it isn't. It's this wonderful canvas that a whole host of character relationships and dynamics can play out across. The movie is more concerned with its characters than it is about a bunch of busy work to fill out what many movies feel is required of them in terms of plot. This plot is laid out in the opening moments of the movie with no dialogue. How fantastic is that scene? We get the murder that kicks things off, the arrest, and the first glimpse of one of the most important relationships in the movie, that being between Sheriff John T. Chance and Dude, his former deputy that has become the town drunk over the past couple of years. The disgust in John Wayne's face as he kicks away the spittoon that Dude's hand is descending into says as much or more than the exposition we get later to flesh out Dude's backstory. And that shot looking up at the Duke from ground level, I've mentioned before, and it bears repeating, John Wayne had some of the greatest character introductions in movie history. That opening scene is the part of this movie that I've seen the most. Almost every time my family would visit my one grandfather, my sister and I would race to the living room and put in either the VHS tape of Rio Bravo or Cahill U.S. Marshal that my grandparents owned. Cahill also has a wonderful character introduction, but in a different way. But we would put in one of those movies and just watch as much as we could until we were called back to the kitchen for lunch. So everything about this opening is burned into my memory. The music as Dean Martin slides through the back door of the saloon, the gunshot as Claude Akins murders Bing Russell, and the sound of John Wayne's voice as he delivers the first dialogue of the movie. Joe, you're under arrest. There's something about the sound recording in Rio Bravo that is so distinctive. It's crisp and gives a depth to everyone's voices. It's somewhat indefinable, but each time I hear anyone speak in this movie, it transports me back to when I was a little kid, sitting on the floor, far too close to that little old TV, waiting for John Wayne to come on screen. Backing up a little bit, famously, the idea for Rio Bravo came from John Wayne and Howard Hawks' displeasure over the film High Noon. The sight of a courageous sheriff going around asking for help did not seem fitting to them. While I'm sure there is truth in that, there are a couple of points that I always think of. John Wayne's dislike of High Noon can't have been that strong, at least at the time of High Noon's release, as he happily accepted the Oscar for Best Actor on behalf of Gary Cooper, who did not attend the ceremony that year. If you haven't seen John Wayne's acceptance speech, check it out. It's quite funny, and he even claims to have wished he'd gotten the part of Will Kane. And the other point is, Rio Bravo was released 7 years after High Noon. So while it can be said it's a response to High Noon, where John Wayne's sheriff is constantly turning down help from everyone that offers, it can't quite be called a reactionary film, hastily produced to rebut the point made by High Noon. For myself, I like High Noon. It's quite rightly regarded as a classic, a tense, Western thriller almost, but it's also a movie that I've seen maybe 3 times in my life, whereas Rio Bravo is a movie I've seen probably dozens of times. And that comes from Rio Bravo's tone and from this atmosphere of getting to hang out with a fantastic group of characters that feel like friends at this point. There would be a way to tell this story in 80 to 90 minutes, like High Noon, or Silver Load with John Payne, or 3 Hours to Kill with Dana Andrews. Tight little westerns with a ticking clock element. But doing that, with Rio Bravo at least, would be to sacrifice so many small moments between these characters and all the little touches that bring them to life. And one other piece of trivia, Harry Carey Jr.'s name is listed in the opening credits, despite his not appearing in the movie after his scenes were cut. But let's get into the characters and the performances that made them iconic. John Wayne plays John T. Chance, as I'd said, and I love him in this movie. This was his second last Western of the 50s, with The Horse Soldiers coming out the same year, What's always seemed strange to me was how few westerns he made during the 50s. For the rest of the most famous western actors, Jimmy Stewart, Randolph Scott, Joel McCrea, this was the decade where they made the most westerns in the quickest succession. But John Wayne made only 5: Rio Grande, Hondo, The Searchers, and the two I've already mentioned. Between Rio Bravo and The Searchers, he did make 2 of his best movies and 2 of the best westerns ever made, but it was only after the 60s began that he really started specializing in westerns again. But back to John T. Chance. He's this extremely professional, very skilled lawman. I love his almost nightly turns around the town, where he patrols the streets to make sure he keeps a lid on things. He carries his loop-levered Winchester like it's an extension of his arm, and he can frighten a deadly gunman just by staring at him for too long. He is what holds the entire movie together. While other characters get flashier scenes to play, larger narrative arcs to go through, John T. Chance is what they all orbit around. He's a rock at the center of the movie, one that can admit the tension and nerves that he's feeling while knowing that he and his small team must accomplish their goal alone, without endangering the lives of other, less skilled civilians. Well-meaning amateurs, he calls them. John Wayne wears his Red River D belt buckle throughout the movie, which is always fun to see, a nice reference to he and Howard Hawks' first collaboration, and his hat. I remember as a kid thinking, why is John Wayne wearing a hat that looks like it belongs on Gabby Hayes or someone like that? Of course, once I learned it was the same hat that he'd worn in Stagecoach, the Cavalry Trilogy, Hondo, Legend of the Lost, others as well, my opinion changed. The choice of hat actually adds to this character. This isn't a man that feels the need to look cool. Seeing it on his head says, me and this hat have a history. It's battered, it's perhaps seen better days, but it stood the test of time, like John T. Chance himself. And it gives off this carefree attitude that is displayed in that one piece of costuming, which adds an air of experience and gravitas to John T. Chance. And I love all of that. But sadly, this was the last movie he wore it in. He loaned it to Sammy Davis Jr. during the making of the Rat Pack Western Sergeants 3, and it apparently nearly disintegrated, as Sinatra, Dean Martin, etc. would routinely pull it down around his ears for daring to try and look like John Wayne. I've seen Sergeants 3, and let's just say I don't think that movie was worth destroying a beloved piece of Western movie history like John Wayne's hat. Speaking of Dean Martin, he delivers what I consider his greatest film performance in Rio Bravo, as the recovering alcoholic dude. He and John Wayne share some amazing scenes, and their dynamic is the best demonstration of Howard Hawks' favorite themes of camaraderie, men working together as a team, and trust between professionals. And the way in which John T. chooses to help his struggling friend is so in keeping with the man we've seen him to be. There's no hand-holding, no allowing for him to feel sorry for himself. It's just treat him like he's back where he belongs, and if he can't handle that, get out. Dean Martin's performance is filled with so many little moments, like the look of pride on his face when John Wayne tells him, they'll let you in the front door from now on, or casually reloading his gun after cutting Bob Steele's rein with a bullet, or his slowly returning confidence, which is shattered by being bested by the bad guys at one point. Dean Martin brings so much pathos and yet determination to get himself out of the situation he put himself in. Watching him pound on his leg as he fights with his withdrawal almost brings tears to my eyes. But then, the triumphant scene as he pours his glass back into the bottle when he's on the brink of relapsing. Didn't spill a drop, he says, as he prepares to try again, and not let his failure, as he sees it, to stop him from regaining what he'd lost. His delivery of that line always gets me. It's funny that after playing such a beautifully dramatic alcoholic character, that he would go on to become the unsteady on his feet, word-slurring host of the Dean Martin Variety Show and roastmaster of the Dean Martin Celebrity Roasts. Ricky Nelson. While it can't be denied that he's not a great actor, he's exactly what the movie needs. He's this completely confident, almost arrogant young gunslinger who impresses Sheriff Chance with his good sense to not get involved in a fight he doesn't need to, until he does need to. Speaking of which, upon this watch there was one shot that really stood out to me, and that is after his boss, Pat Wheeler, has been killed, Ricky Nelson is given this shot as he kneels by the body of his employer and friend. This is the man who likely gave him his first job, trusted him like an experienced gun hand, and not the young kid that he is. His face is nearly in darkness, and that's the moment when he decides he's going to stick around and take on the men that killed him. Ricky Nelson isn't given many shots dedicated to solely his character, normally sharing the screen with someone else, but Howard Hawks gives him this moment of silent reaction, and it works so well. The performance can feel a little overly mannered, like him rubbing his nose in reference to Montgomery Clift in Red River, but it works for me, and is helped by being surrounded by so many other great actors. I believe Elvis was originally in mind for the role, but was never offered it since Colonel Parker wanted his client to get top billing. In a John Wayne movie? I don't think so. It would have been very interesting though if he had gotten the part. The Duke and the King on screen together? Angie Dickinson is almost the only woman in the movie, other than Estelita Rodriguez, and is really good as well. She shares almost all of her screen time with just John Wayne, and brings out a different side to Sheriff Chance. The side that's afraid of women. It's probably been said by others, but I think you can feel Howard Hawks' direction come out most strongly in her performance, coming across like a young Lauren Bacall did, playing against Bogart. Being this outwardly strong and confident woman that can set the hero back on his heels while trying to hide the fragile side that lies beneath, she and John Wayne have very good chemistry and bring some nice humor to the film in amongst the romance. But if we're going to talk about humor, then it's time to move on to Walter Brennan in one of his greatest roles, Stumpy, the aging guard of the jailhouse. As a kid, he was always one of my favorite parts of this movie, and he still is. His character is in some ways the comedic sidekick, but like everyone in this movie, he's more than that. His backstory is given in one line when we learn that his small ranch was stolen by the villain of the movie, Nathan Burdett, some years back, and still holds a grudge against the family because of it. And he's this old man who wants to be given the credit he deserves for being good at his job while constantly seeking the approval of Sheriff Chance. He's given so many quotable lines, and his constant, I'm going, is legendary. And if you need to be cheered up, just revisit the scene that ends with John Wayne kissing him on the top of his head. It's hilarious. And while we're on funny characters, Pedro Gonzalez as the hotel owner, Carlos, is wonderful as well. His first scene and the red bloomers, what more can I say? It's great. But again, he doesn't just say a funny line and then leave. He's another fiercely loyal friend of the sheriff, and even though he's been told so many times not to help, he shows up to help during the climactic shootout. Ward Bond made one of his final film appearances after a staggeringly long filmography as Pat Wheeler, a friend of the sheriff's who was murdered for offering to help. He was one of John Wayne's best friends in real life. They co-starred in so many movies together, and their scenes reflect that. There's an easy comfort between them, and Ward Bond could add so much character to whatever part he played, no matter how small. And lastly, I'll talk about the villains. Claude Akins is Joe Burdett, and while it's also a fairly small role, he's perfect in it. He's this smirking thug, with obviously no regard for human life, as the opening scene demonstrates, who just so happens to have a very wealthy and much smarter man for a brother. What I like is that neither side likes him all that much. The sheriff and his men for obvious reasons, but his brother doesn't seem to either, or at least respect him. It's another show of loyalty, this need to save his brother just because he's family, even though he's a murderer, and probably worse in Nathan Burdett's eyes, a fool. Nathan Burdett is played by John Russell, whose piercing eyes stand out in everything he's in, from this to the TV series Lawman to Pale Rider. He's really only given a couple of scenes, but he's great in them. He stands out from everyone else, the one character wearing a suit, carrying an ever-present riding crop, and his arrival is perfect because it happens so late into the movie. The whole time we've been hearing that Nathan Burdett is sending men. He keeps hiring more, he's coming to town. So when he does, it's a big event. Watching him and John Wayne go toe-to-toe is excellent, but like most villains in John Wayne movies, once Sheriff Chance lays out for him what's going to happen if they try anything, you know he doesn't have a chance. Pun intended. No matter how many men he's got. The script, by Jules Furthman and Lee Brackett, is perfect. I'm not sure how else to describe it. Each line builds these characters and tells us more about them with such economy, and it lets us in on so many shared histories between these characters, but again, almost all in small moments, and little lines that build out this world. Other than the scene when we learn about how Dude fell so far, there aren't really any other scenes of sitting around talking about any character's past. We know John T. knew Colorado's father at some point. Pat Wheeler has been coming to town for a couple of years and always saw Dude as a bum staggering through the saloons, until now. Carlos and John T. have this fun relationship that has built over time. All of this is either shown without telling or doled out in small pieces of dialogue that trust the audience to piece it all together themselves. And to top it all off, it's so quotable. A game-legged old man and a drunk. That's all you got? That's what I've got. The movie is 2 hours and 20 minutes, but I don't think it feels anywhere near that long. It never stops moving, but at the same time, most of it takes place in the sheriff's office and at the hotel. There are scenes at the various saloons and up and down the streets at night, but most of it plays out in these two locations. Howard Hawks shoots these wonderfully, making them feel larger and more expansive than they might actually be. There's the front office and the jail cell area, the hole where Stumpy watches over Joe. There's the hotel lobby, the sheriff's room, and Feather's room. Each of these are the perfect balance of feeling worn in and lived in while still feeling like a movie set. And the exteriors. I've been to old Tucson studios, and that was such a fun experience, but there is so much weathered realism and flavor given to any movie shot there, and Rio Bravo in particular. The adobe buildings, the iconic streets, the landscapes dotted by saguaro cactus and Golden Gate Mountain looming over it all. The movie looks fantastic. The score is by Dmitri Tiomkin, and I know I keep calling things perfect in this review, but it is too. From the quietly rolling opening theme to the songs we're treated to down at the jailhouse, which I'll get to, believe me, to Diguelo ratcheting up the tension, each song gives the movie such a mood, and is another huge reason why I keep revisiting this movie. The song Diguelo, though, is used so well with the Alamo connection bringing to mind John Wayne's passion project that was about to get underway the following year, and how it starts getting to our little group of heroes. I particularly like the shot over John Wayne's shoulder as he sits stewing in his chair, the incessant playing of the song wearing him down. And then Stumpy joins in on his harmonica. That moment of comedy breaks the suspense a little bit, right when it needs to. Howard Hawks once said, a great movie is 3 great scenes and no bad scenes. This movie, without question, has no bad scenes. So in an effort to honor that quote, I'll try to limit my highlight of favorite moments to 3 scenes. I've already talked about the opening, so I won't count that, even though obviously it's great. But the first would be the scene where John T. and Dude chase Pat Wheeler's killer into a saloon. I hardly have words to describe how much I love this scene. John Wayne saying, "We'll remember you said that," is great, after one mouthy cowboy declares, "No one just came in." But then Dean Martin takes over. The way that Dude methodically handles the situation, disarming the whole room and then trying to determine who was the killer, is incredible, because it shows what Dude probably was like when he was a working deputy, the way he could handle any trouble that came along. And John T.'s expression confirms it. You can see how impressed he is when Dude calls out the bartender for moving when he was supposed to freeze, seemingly without even seeing him. But then the loss of confidence when he can't find the man, and the callback to the opening with an oily Myron Healy tossing a coin into the spittoon. You can feel Dude deflating in front of all of them, until he sees the blood dripping from the rafters into a glass on the bar, and then blows him away with one shot. And then, the little button at the end when John T. nearly takes a man's head off with his rifle barrel and says, "Aw, I'm not gonna hurt him." In their world, I think hurt means kill, because that guy would very likely have a broken jaw. The second scene I have to discuss is the sing-along, where they put their 2 singer-slash-actors, Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson, to even more good use. The songs, My Rifle, My Pony and Me, and Cindy, are both great. But My Rifle, My Pony and Me is just wonderful. I'm not sure if Dean Martin's voice ever sounded better than it did during that song, and it's so soothing. What other Western, other than one starring Roy Rogers or Gene Autry, would take the time for some of the tough guys of the movie to sit down and sing a few tunes? I'm not talking a saloon girl belting out a number. I'm talking the gunslingers who have already proved their toughness. I can't think of too many. And what's even better is when it comes during the movie. This is after John T. has decided the 4 of them will stay at the jailhouse together until the U.S. Marshal comes to pick up Joe Burdett. This is the most under siege they've been. They are literally getting ready to stockpile food and supplies without intending to leave. They almost lost Dude in the previous scene until he changed course. Theoretically, this is the most under threat they've been so far. And what do? They bond over a couple amazing songs, laughing together, cementing their group into the ironclad team they need to be to survive this. I love that. And while the other 3, including Stumpy, all sing together, John T. stands back, smiling, but not joining in. Even when he's a part of a group, John Wayne's characters are always a little separate from the rest. There's always a part of him that's like Ethan Edwards at the end of The Searchers, left to wander. One other note on My Rifle, My Pony and Me, the tune of that song, with different words, is what opens Red River, which also has a Dmitri Tiomkin score. I love that connection tying these 2 movies together. And the third great scene, I think it's time for honorable mentions. The little gunfight in the street where Angie Dickinson throws the flower pot is always great. I remember reading that Ricky Nelson had gotten so fast with his Colts that he was already firing by the time John Wayne had caught the rifle tossed to him. So he had to slow down a little bit so they could both get in on gunning down the 3 bad guys. The shot that's in the movie is so smooth and adorns one of the movie's posters. The scene where they kidnap Dude and force John T. down to the jail to trade for Joe is also so well staged. The unspoken cue for Stumpy to take down the bad guys is also a wonderful moment. I could go on and on with the moments I can't get enough of, but the third great scene is the finale. The walk down to the exchange with John T. in Colorado leading Joe, the exchange itself, and stop when I say stop, or I'll stop you. That line is brilliant. And the explosive climax. At first it's a little tense, and Dmitri Tiomkin's score as Joe and Dude march towards one another only makes it more so. But then the shooting starts, and it's just fun. Dude in Colorado waving at one another while dodging ricochets, John T taking down bad guys like he's in a shooting gallery, and Stumpy cackling while lobbing dynamite into the bad guy's hideout. The dynamite is like this cherry on top of a movie that has been brimming with characters and drama and plenty of comedy, and then just, let's blow some stuff up. The explosions, back when they did them for real, look so impressive. Nailing sticks of dynamite with a Winchester rifle, let alone a Colt 45, is maybe unbelievably impressive, but these are the most professional lawmen in the West, so I buy it. And one last honorable mention. Stumpy tossing Feather's discarded leggings around his neck like a scarf while he and Dude saunter away is the perfect ending, while Dean Martin croons us into the end title screen. If you haven't been able to tell, Rio Bravo is another of my favorite movies. It's the film equivalent of comfort food to me, and I challenge anyone to watch this movie and come away not having fallen in love with it, if you haven't already. If you claim not to like it, I get it, it's fun to be contrary, but let's just admit one thing. Rio Bravo is a masterpiece. Highly, highly recommended, as highly as I possibly can. And one last thing, the movie was, some people say remade, I say elements from it were used in El Dorado and Rio Lobo. Two more Howard Hawks and John Wayne collaborations. El Dorado I also have a huge fondness for. Rio Lobo, it's time I rewatched it. El Dorado I definitely need to revisit soon though. But anyway, thank you so much for listening to me rave about this classic movie. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. If you did enjoy it, I hope you'll check back to Hildebrand Productions, as I'll have more reviews coming shortly. Thanks again, and adios for now.